I remember walking through the halls and seeing this Rembrandt self-portrait at the end of 3 different rooms, and it just simply arrested me. It grabbed my soul and it pulled me to him. And I remember thinking, my God, if I could do something that powerful, even just one painting, I could die today. My name is Richard T. Scott. I'm a contemporary figurative painter. Originally, I'm from Georgia in the south of the United States, but I spent a lot of time studying in New York and Paris. And now I spend part of my time in New York, part of my time in Paris. I'm 32 years old. Originality is an interesting question because our culture tends to characterize things as being purely original or purely unoriginal. It's derivative or it's completely original. And the thing is I don't think that, especially after thousands of years of recorded history and 100,000 years of painting, I don't think that we really have the capacity to make a painting that is absolutely purely original. But at the same time, nothing is ever completely derivative either on the other end of the spectrum. So, for example, if you try to copy Vermeer or Ribera or anybody, even Picasso, and you do it as faithfully as you possibly can, there will always be something of your own nature in it. Something about the way the brushstrokes move across the surface. Something about your value relationships. Your essence, your spirit will always be in there. And so I think that again, I would have to say that there are degrees. There are degrees of originality and degrees of unoriginality. And of course, we strive for originality. But I would say that I would like to characterize it in a different way. I would say that the most original thing is a masterpiece. Taking an idea or a technique, hopefully both, to the farthest extent that you possibly can, and doing it better than anyone has ever done before. Maybe the idea has been done before, but if nobody has nailed it like you have, then that's as original as you can get. My background in art, I guess began quite early. I started painting when I was about 6 years old. I think the first time I realized that this is what I wanted to do was when I saw a painting on my grandparents' wall, and I would stare at it for hours. And my parents and my grandparents thought I might be autistic. And so maybe that's why I thought I was artistic. Perhaps I misunderstood them. But I remember being completely obsessed with that painting, absolutely loving seeing the brushstrokes, the vibrance of the color, the lyricism of the line. And I decided to try my own hand at it. It wasn't until much later that I got any kind of actual training or even considered it to be a career possibility. Later on, I studied at the University of Georgia, Lamar Dodd School of Art for undergrad, and studied painting and art history, a little bit of printmaking. And then I was lucky enough to go to the New York Academy of Art for a master's degree in painting. And after that, a short story, well, to make a long story short, I studied with Odd Nerdrum in Paris, in Norway first and then in Paris for 3 years. In the beginning stages, I think the only person who really encouraged me was my grandfather, after whom I'm named. And the rest of my family weren't particularly discouraging me, but they didn't really see it as a serious possibility. It's not a serious career. It's not a serious goal that you would follow where I'm from. I kind of grew up in a rather I don't want to say poor, but economically challenged region in an economically challenged family. And it didn't seem to be a very rational choice, but my grandfather really, I think, enabled me to understand the value of what I was doing and to understand the importance of getting an education in order to get to where I wanted to go. So I have a lot to thank him for. My technique has changed quite a bit over the years, especially since childhood. I experimented with abstract expressionism when I was a child and as a teenager. I moved more towards Impressionism after that, and I dabbled with post-Impressionism for a while, whatever was inspiring me at the time. And I slowly became more figurative and more representational because that's where my interests were leading me. So I went through a phase where I painted very alla prima after Sargent and Sorolla, and I loved that fresh, that freshness in the paint and the brushstrokes. And I still incorporate everything that I've learned over the years through experimenting with all these different approaches. I incorporate pieces of that in the way that I paint today. But now I'm after kind of, I guess, a contemporary understanding, a contemporary and more experimental take on, I would say, Rembrandt's process and technique, because he did a lot of sanding as well with volcanic stone. I approach painting primarily from a compositional standpoint. That's my primary goal. I want to make a composition that really compels people to view the work and to enter into the work. So that dictates my process. My process is I began through classical training. I began in a very regimented way years ago. I used to do the entire grisaille and then paint in semi-transparent layers on top of that, and glazes and so on and so forth. Now, I do a lot of studies before I actually tackle the canvas. But when I do paint on the canvas, I'll sometimes gesture in an underpainting just to get the proportions and the value relationships of the composition right. But pretty quickly, I go straight into simply just painting, and that allows me, I think, to change the composition as I'm going, because as well as you might plan the work beforehand, and it's incredibly valuable to do so. I feel like I have to allow the piece to evolve and speak back to me as I'm painting, and that's part of the reason why I love it so much. That's what inspires me to keep going. The surprise of finding something that you didn't realize was there. And I think also that gives you a kind of pentimenti when you move the position of the arm. There's something about the previous layers where the previous position of the arm kind of somehow shimmers through a little bit, and you get this sense of movement in time. You get this sense of change. It's more dynamic. And in an archaeological sense, because I paint many layers of opaque, impasto, semi-opaque, transparent, so on and so forth. I sand and scrape back down sometimes, revealing previous layers, and paint on top of that. It's an additive and subtractive process. And so you get this sense of archaeology. And so for me, it meets all of my goals. I like I'm very interested in the quality of the paint surface. I'm very interested in the abstract relationships between the texture and the color and the surface when you stand close. And then, of course, when you step back, I want it to resolve into this relatively illusionistic, but entirely convincing kind of gestalt. So that the process and the end product, I think, dictates my techniques. The question of what art is in general is a very difficult question, and I think that makes it complicated even for the individual to answer that question. What is art, and how do we perceive art, and how do we create it? How do we interact with it? Ayn Rand said something very interesting about this. She said, if I can recall, and I will probably misquote it, but she said that art is the physical manifestation of mankind's metaphysical principles and values. And I think, to put it in more layman's terms, I think that's somewhat accurate. I think that it's complicated. That's complicated. I think that art is, in many ways, a distillation of the universal human condition, a distillation of human experiences, manifested in a physical form, or it couldn't. Perhaps it could be film, but in a form that can be immediately apprehended by the senses, so that these values and these principles and this experience, this emotive and intellectual experience that's encompassed by the work, can be sensed by the viewer precognitively, so that they can feel the impact of the content and the emotion and the aesthetic before analyzing it. And for me, I think that's the heart of what good art is. I think there are many different levels of art. I wouldn't say that it's black and white, as in there's good art and bad art. I would say more accurately that good art is art that eloquently, passionately, and skillfully meets the intentions of its creator and articulates the concepts and the ideas intended by the artist to the viewer. And I would say that just to focus on the dichotomy a bit more, so that we understand the middle stages, I would say that bad art is kind of a failed attempt at that, in that it doesn't communicate itself to the viewer in an articulate or eloquent way. And so this can take many forms. Of course, this necessitates some form of skill. I would like to make the example of Goya, Saturn devouring his children. I think there's a tremendous amount of skill in the way that he understands the psychological nature of the story and the psychological nature of the human content. And I think that the way that he relates the composition, the light and the shadow and the color relationships with the kind of visceral quality of the texture and the brush strokes, there is a tremendous amount of skill there. It's not the same kind of skill that you would find in Leonardo da Vinci or Bouguereau, perhaps, but there is certainly an incredibly valuable type of skill. So I believe that that's inherent in it's necessary for being able to communicate something, some kind of skill. If you take, for example, Rothko's Seagram series, a lot of more traditional painters today might say that there is a lack of skill there. But what I like about Rothko's Seagram series is actually something very similar to what I like about Rembrandt, in that the subtle variations of value relationships and color relationships give you a sense of light. They give you a sense of spirituality. They give you an idea that there's something beneath the surface. And so, whereas I would say that personally, I find Rembrandt to be more powerful to me, I can't discount Rothko's Seagram series because I do see inherent skill in that. I think it's very important for the artist to have a strong working knowledge of art history and contemporary art, because if you're first of all, nobody is working in a vacuum. That's not possible. It might be interesting intellectually as an experiment to have someone, say, from some uncontacted tribe in Southeast Asia or in South America and to see what they're creating. I mean, that's interesting. But the thing is that 99% of people are going to repeat something that's already been done before, and they're likely not going to do it to the highest level possible for whatever genre they're doing, whatever they're doing. When we learn about art history, we not only learn about how it's been done before, we add a tool to our tool belt. So if you happen to be interested in abstraction, you look at all of the great abstract painters. If you happen to be interested in surrealism, you look at that. If you happen to be interested in the Dutch Golden Age, you look at Rembrandt and Hammershoy and Vermeer, and you can learn from what they've done. I think that we can gain a lot more as individual artists and as a society and as a culture to stand on the backs of giants rather than to try and reinvent the wheel all the time. There is some value in that, but it's really hit or miss, and very, very few people are going to accomplish something significant if everyone is working in a vacuum. I mean, civilization itself is by nature, it is building upon the knowledge and accomplishments of previous generations. So I think that's how I would characterize the value of art history. There are a great number of living artists that deeply inspire me, and it would be a very long list. And I feel like I have to mention a few, but I'll pick one and speak more about him. I'm incredibly inspired by Odd Nerdrum, who was my mentor. I'm incredibly inspired by Jenny Saville, Vincent Desiderio, Stephen Assail, the recently deceased Andrew Wyeth. There are so many others, but I would have to say that since we'll probably talk more about Odd Nerdrum later, I'd like to talk more about Vincent Desiderio. What really inspires me about his work, what I find incredibly powerful, is the way that he's able to convey narrative in an open sense, meaning that almost like film in a cinematic way. Vincent Desiderio is able to convey the passage of time in a flat, static image, which is remarkable. I've been chasing Rembrandt for about 6 years now. Before him, I was very interested. Very interested in the 19th century, and I kind of moved back through time and settled on the Dutch old masters. I still am, but was very much in love with Vermeer and Hammershoy. But Rembrandt really caught my eye. I guess it was more about 7 years ago when I first moved to New York from Georgia, and I saw his work for the first time in person at the Met. And I remember walking through the halls and seeing this Rembrandt self-portrait at the end of 3 different rooms, and it just simply arrested me. It grabbed my soul and it pulled me to him. And I remember thinking, my God, if I could do something that powerful, even just one painting, I could die today. For me, that's the ultimate thing. So I started copying Rembrandt at the Met when I was at the New York Academy, and I did quite a few copies of his, and then through him I found out about Odd Nerdrum, and Odd works in a similar way and very, very inspired by Rembrandt, and it was because of Rembrandt that I came across Odd's work and fell in love with his work, and subsequently decided to study with him. So I would say I've been obsessed with Rembrandt for about 7 years, but I think I've only been approaching, to some degree, to the degree that I have, his technique or his understanding of light or anything like that in the last 2 years or so. It's of course, I mean, he's one of the greatest masters, if not the greatest master, and it's very hard. But also the challenge is what inspires me to keep going. My work really makes use of all the tools that I have available, except for projection, and that's really for a selfish reason, because I want every opportunity I possibly have to practice my drawing, and I feel like if I'm projecting something, that's taking an opportunity away from me to redraw something, to practice, to keep my chops up. I think of it like a violinist. A violinist will, in order to perform at the highest of their skill level, they will play scales every day for hours, and then they will go and perform in a concerto or something. And so I'm always trying to keep my instrument tuned. I'm always trying to keep my skills at the highest level I possibly can. And that wavers from time to time. You know, things happen in life. You have to go visit the family for Christmas, and you have interruptions, and that's natural. But you know, forcing myself to redraw things every single time, I think is really valuable for me, and it helps me to keep my skills up. And that's important because I'm trying to communicate not just through the images as symbols for things, like the subject represents this idea, but through the way that it's painted, the language of the brush strokes, the language of the composition, the language of the texture of the paint, and that, you know, really rests upon my ability to handle the paint and to draw and to conceptualize what I'm seeing. But so I use both photographs, and I work from life, and I also oftentimes work from my imagination, from dreams. Sometimes I will draw something and try and memorize it, and then paint that from my mind. And so I'm also exercising those muscles, trying to increase my ability to visualize things. And I think that in general, I don't have a problem with people using photography, but I feel like, you know, when people are painting photorealism, they're trying to approach the photograph, and the lens, the camera, simplifies reality in specific ways. It compresses value relationships. It compresses color relationships. It a lot of times takes out the subtle undertones and the nuances in color. Oftentimes, the lens distortion can bend linear perspective, and what that does is it takes away choices from the artist. And I want to have as many choices as I possibly can. I want to control all the factors I possibly can. Because I've learned painting from life for so many years, I feel like I'm comfortable adapting the photograph to life, because I use both, and I'm working back and forth all the time, and from my head and my imagination, my knowledge and my intuition. And I just think that when people are trying to copy a photograph just to make it look like a photograph, I don't know. I mean, if they enjoy it and it has a great result, that's fine. I have respect for that. I just feel like photography does photography really well, and so it's not really interesting to me. From what I've observed, large-scale photography is certainly commanding a large portion of the art market, the contemporary art market, and I understand why. The technology is advanced. They have some. You can produce some incredibly beautiful work, especially if you're manipulating it with Photoshop. You have so much at your fingertips, and I have a lot of respect for some of that work. For example, a great friend of mine, Thomas Dodd, who lives down in Tennessee, makes these amazing pieces, which are photo manipulations. He uses Photoshop and I guess other materials, and composes these pieces from many different photographs. And I absolutely love his work. And then at the end, he puts a layer of semi-transparent wax onto the surface of the print, which creates a beautiful tactile sense. I don't think that photography is really going to push out representational painting from the marketplace, because really they're after two different things, and they're after two different effects. I mean, representational painting, even someone like Jacob Collins, or someone who's trying to approach painting exactly what they see at all times, they're still a distillation of reality that happens in the mind of the artist. There's still a compression of value ranges, light relationships. It becomes a language, and it's a different animal. And you also have, of course, the paint surface. You have the texture of the paint on the canvas. You have transparent layers and all of these things that aren't in photography. So I don't see that as a problem. The contemporary art market today is quite varied, and in fact, I think it's important to say that there are several markets. You have your high-end blue chip market with Jeff Koons and Damien Hirst and Anish Kapoor and those guys, and that has been largely driven by investors and whatnot, and I won't go into any details there, but I think there's a certain decadence involved in that market that a lot of people have been. Actually, I've been reading a lot of articles about this in The Guardian in the UK and articles in New York Times about this, where a lot of people are suddenly are suddenly becoming tired with this. Now, that's not to say that conceptual art or installation art is going to disappear by any means. I just feel like it's no longer going to completely dominate the entire market. And I think also because of the internet, because of kind of the interconnected nature of the internet and artists and markets and globalization today, I think the art market today, at least from what I've observed, is becoming more decentralized. I don't think we're any longer going to have a single place where all things happen. New York is, of course, going to continue to be a major player, but as we've seen with, for example, China and Hong Kong surpassing the United States as the largest art market in terms of sales, in terms of money exchanging hands. You also have London, you have Berlin, you have Los Angeles, you have Paris. There are a lot of markets that are continuing to flourish, and especially because of the interconnected nature of our world today, because of globalization and the internet and social media, we can connect with each other, with other artists, and with collectors and with institutions across vast oceans and all over the world almost instantaneously. And so this is enabling a lot more than just a single city with a single movement dominating all things. So I would say that representational art today is enjoying an incredible renaissance. It's enjoying an incredible rebirth, especially in the United States, but also internationally. I've seen quite a bit happening, of course, in London. I've seen some great work coming out of Italy and Spain and Scandinavia and Australia. But really the bulk of representational work today is kind of exploding in the United States, mainly New York and Los Angeles. Although from what I've observed, you do have a number of people who are kind of on the cusp between what I would characterize as the representational market and the contemporary art market. Whereas the contemporary art market I would characterize as being, funded by Francois Pinault and Peter Brandt, these really, really big Uber collectors, and also the institutions like the Whitney and Gagosian and whatnot. So, for example, Vincent Desiderio is kind of on that line in between the two. But then you also have your more kind of traditional American market, which is more interested in the Andrew Wyeths, for example, which I have tremendous love and respect for Andrew Wyeth. But his work tends to be less edgy in a contemporary way. I find it edgy in a tremendous way because of his composition, because of the depth, because every time he references life, there's a question of death. There's a beautiful holistic understanding of the human experience there. But he tends to be considered more decorative, and his work just happens to go better with interior decor. And so you have another market which is kind of focused on that. What I find that's interesting is that today, especially a lot of you have a couple of older generation which are really kind of in this genre, like Vincent Desiderio, Odd Nerdrum, Ginny Sayville is there. Julie Heffernan, I have to mention her because I love her work as well, who are on that cusp between the representational art world and the contemporary art world. And I find that, especially with my work and a lot of my colleagues, we find ourselves in the middle of these two worlds, in the middle of these two markets. And the thing that's interesting to me is that I think I see that expanding, I see that exploding. So you have different markets, but they overlap. So I guess if I were to try and simplify all of that, I would say that things are getting incredibly diverse and incredibly complex, and I'm very excited to see how that plays out. I consider myself a professional artist. I do make my living primarily from selling my work. I would say mostly originals, a significant number of commissions, portraits, and even I have. Which my favorite commissions are when collectors ask me to do an original piece based on a theme that they give me. So for example, I just did this interior based upon the theme of fear and absence, which a friend and collector of mine in Paris asked me to do. And it was an interesting challenge. But the reason I would characterize myself as a professional artist instead of a commercial artist is that my work isn't commercially driven. I'm not painting for a market. In fact, my approach has been the opposite. My approach has been to paint the work that I find compelling, the work that I find interesting, and to simply find the market out there that exists for that. And that took a lot of research. It took a lot of talking to many different people and many different perspectives. But I kind of formed an idea of who my target audience is. And it turns out that they tend to be very much like me. So I guess similar natures appreciate similar aesthetics. So yeah, that's what I would say about it. I think that online galleries are certainly becoming more predominant these days, like Saatchi Online, for example, and especially galleries that already have a kind of group of collectors and a following from previously having a brick and mortar gallery. They already have the trust of their clientele. I see them thriving in the future, especially as technology advances, especially as you can get better photographs of your work to present. You know, I actually do a good 65% of my sales online, personally. Not through a gallery, though, simply because through my website and through social networking and whatnot. And I think that one of the advantages, there are disadvantages as well about the online galleries, because the client can't see the work in person to begin with, and some people shy away from that, and they shy away from some of the smaller online galleries because they don't know about the reputation. But all in all, I see that as a positive movement, especially in given how the internet has changed the market and has changed the interaction and the relationship between the artist and the gallery. Brick and mortar galleries I don't think they're going to disappear, but there's going to be fewer of them because of the overhead of running an actual physical space is going to be constrictive. artists today are increasingly having the ability to show their work directly to collectors and to the audience that they want to reach, and also through online galleries. And so that's necessitated kind of a reinvention of the relationship between the artist and the gallerist. Even 5 or 6 years ago, I remember trying to approach a gallery. It was very difficult. They were, "Who are you? You know, I don't bring your work in here. Don't talk to me." So I got a very cold shoulder. And if I sent a package to people, the difference was that at that time I was approaching galleries, whereas now galleries approach me. And part of that is because I've successfully been able to use the internet to get my work out there. That's true. But also I think another part of it is how the internet is changing this relationship. And so galleries, the ones that I work with, are required to have a much more interactive relationship with the artist, to do much more by way of promotion for the work, they don't really have a stranglehold on the market anymore. When I first started approaching galleries after I had produced a body of work, this was back in the era where they were still kind of, you would still give people slides. We were starting to transition to CDs, but still a lot of people were using slides. So I actually would make a slide sheet of my work and make a package with a cover letter and my resume and so on and so forth, and a letter of intent. Why do I want to show with you? Why do I think we're a good fit? You know, I did a lot of research on. I think the important thing also was finding the galleries that seem to work with your aesthetic, like you seem to be a good fit. A lot of people will send out 100 packets, and most of them are to galleries where they would never fit with each other. They don't have the right clients, they don't have the right ideas, the right vision. They just don't fit together. And so I sent out fewer packets, but targeted to the galleries that I thought I would want to show my work in and who would like my work. And I got nowhere. The next step was that because I got no results from sending out packets, very seldom did I even get a rejection letter. I decided that I needed to network, and so I went to a lot of these openings and started rubbing elbows with people, talking with people about the work, trying to kind of get someone to introduce me to the gallerist, or at least one of the significant artists who showed there. And that gave me limited success. And through that, I was able to start exhibiting in group exhibitions. But I never really got any significant sales or press or anything from that because I wasn't important for the gallerist to spend their time promoting me. I was just some kid, just fresh out of grad school. And why would they invest money and time in me when they already had somebody who already had a resume, already had clients, already had press, already had a brand that they could put a little bit of money into and get a better result. So once I understood that, I decided that I was going about it completely wrong, that I needed to build up my own image, my own brand, and do it myself. And so I looked at the internet, which I was not a very tech-savvy person at that time. And I'm only remedially tech-savvy today. But I realized there was a huge potential there. So I started, I signed up for Facebook, and I started a blog, and I started participating on Saatchi Online, and I started, submitting my work to competitions and just trying to build up, a network that way. And it took a number of years. And it took a long time to hone what exactly it was I was after, and to build a brand. But it really worked because now people find my work on Saatchi Online or on Facebook, or they come across my website because it ranks pretty high on the Google search engine because of all the work I've done. And they approach me. Galleries approach me for exhibitions, and so I have better choices. The best advice I could give to an emerging artist who's trying to get to the point where they're making a living off of their work is is to not really focus on galleries so much right now. Focus on making the best work that you possibly can. Go deeply into whatever it is that you do. Find other people who are doing something similar. Find other people whose work you respect and you love, and who are kind of in the same boat as you are, and talk with them, exchange ideas, read books about whatever, philosophy or art history or artists that you love. Talk about them, exchange these ideas. And I would say what I like to call collaborative competition, which a good friend of mine and I had started working on. I'm sure I wasn't the first person to come up with it, but I might have been the first person to put a name on it. I don't know. I'm sure a lot of other people did it before. But I realized that artists rise up in groups. It's really difficult to get attention as a single solitary lone painter or even photographer or videographer or installation, anything. It's really, really difficult to get attention because a lot of the art market today judges, as I said before, based upon what you already have, not your potential. So it's difficult to break through. The way that you can get attention, I think, is by building this community. Get your friends together, compete with them, but give all of your secrets to each other. So, for example, I picked a great friend of mine, Adam Miller, whose work I really respected. I met him while we were working for Jeff Koons, and we just immediately hit it off. I knew I could trust him. I loved his work, and he studied at the Florence Academy, so he had a certain skill set, and I had studied at the New York Academy. And so we just started exchanging ideas and techniques and philosophies and everything. We would critique each other's work. And then when he discovered something new, he would tell me, and I would say, you know what, I'm going to better that. I'm going to take that to the next level. And then he would look at that and he would say, oh, that's great, Richard. I love that. How did you do it? And I would tell him, and then he would take the next step up. And so after a couple of years' time, we had been stepping on it, bouncing off of each other. And we had made so much tremendous progress in such a short amount of time that our kind of friends who weren't really participating in this, and a number of people who had kind of told me, you have to be careful about your secrets, you can't give them out because other people are going to steal them. We kind of left them in the dust. Our work became more genuine, it became more skilled, and we really had a body of work to show to the world. So through that and through expanding to other people with whom we've also done the same thing, we've been able to build kind of a group of people who share ideas and techniques, but also resources and contacts. So, for example, I knew Donald Cuspit from the New York Academy and from speaking with him on a panel discussion, and he's a famous art historian and critic, and so I was able to get him involved in some exhibitions through my contact. And then, for example, Adam might know this gallery and somebody else knows this collector, and then we all bring our resources together and you start to build your own movement. And ultimately, that's what I would advise. I worked for Jeff Koons for a little under 2 years after grad school. And it was kind of a love-hate relationship. I loved many aspects about it. I loved being in the company of so many other artists. He employed at that time around 120 or so painters and sculptors. And so I spent a lot of my time, working on his paintings, but a lot of it it was easy enough for me to do and also have a conversation simultaneously. So I would be sitting with a friend talking about, contemporary art, or we were listening to Radio Lab and talking about some idea in theoretical physics or philosophy or anything, and it was just an incredible kind of meeting point of people, from artists from all different backgrounds. I learned a lot from working for him about certainly the art market through observing him talking with Larry Gagosian and a lot of collectors, and to see how he was able to succeed, to see how he marketed himself to the world, how he branded himself. And there are two things I would say about that. One, I asked him, I said, Jeff, if you were to give us some advice, what would you say the most important thing to your success was? And he said, I worked towards my goals in my work every single day. I did not let a single day pass that I didn't do something for my work. And regardless of what one might think of his work, it doesn't happen to be very interesting to me. But I think that work ethic and that dedication, I think, is a very valuable piece of advice. And also, I also learned about not just branding, but about how my work differs and how my work is not necessarily, the work itself is not about branding. His work is a brand in many instances, in many ways, and that's kind of part of the message. That's part of the point, is that it's this market. It's about capitalism. It's about this branding. It's about a product in a kind of a post-Warholian way. My work is not like that. But in order to succeed today, you have to have some kind of idea of branding. And so it was while I was working there and bouncing ideas off of the other people that I came up with this thought that what I needed to do was find out what it was inherent about me, naturally, sincerely, that stands out, that characterizes me and my work, and build a brand around that. Emphasize it, make it larger than life. So essentially, that's what I did. I like talking about philosophy and aesthetics, and so I decided that part of my brand would be that I'm kind of the guy that likes to talk about art, who likes to debate and talk about ask difficult questions and start conversations and get people talking to each other from different viewpoints, from across the lines, talk to conceptual artists and photographers and historians and writers and musicians and get everyone in a dialogue, create an interesting debate, something that people can be engaged in. So I think that's actually that's been incredibly fun and beneficial for me. I've met a lot of great people. I've had a great time doing it, and I think it's filled kind of a hole that was in the representational art community at the time. Whereas contemporary art tends to have a very interesting dialogue going on. The work doesn't really speak to me, and a lot of people have made that same criticism. But talking around the work, they have a lot of stuff going on. There's a lot of debate, there's a lot of controversy, there's a lot of people talking about it. And I noticed that was lacking in the representational art community. And so I thought in the small way that I could, that I would try to help that to happen. And so that's essentially what I've done. My website is richardtscottart.com. I'm also on Facebook. And LinkedIn and Pinterest, and I'm really using the social networking. I'm represented. My primary gallery is in Paris, L'Oeil du Prince, in the 17th arrondissement, and I really enjoy working with Jan. Jan's the name of the gallerist, because I feel like he's passionate. He loves the work. He truly believes in it, and he's worth his 50%. But In New York, stateside, I have a number of exhibitions coming up. In the beginning of March, I'll have a two-man exhibition with Adam Miller at Last Rites Gallery in Chelsea. And then in April, I have a solo exhibition in Paris. If you're around, New York in March or Paris in April, please feel free to stop by. And if you follow me on Facebook, I'm always updating people on my website. There's a newsletter you can sign up for. If you like. I'm creative, I think, because I don't have a choice. I have this inherent need to create things. Ever since I was a child, I used to take things apart and put them back together, sometimes in the right, correct way, and sometimes not. And I simply always wanted to understand how everything worked, and then I wanted to take those pieces and assemble it into something that made sense to me, that should be. I can't really imagine being anything other than someone who creates. It's simply everything that I do, even before I was making a living as an artist. Everything I did somehow involved some sort of creativity. Even when I was working my way through school, and I had a management position at a newspaper in Georgia. I actually created and instituted new training programs for the people, for the new hires. So it's, for some reason, I simply am just drawn to it, and I think that it's something that makes the human experience worth experiencing. It revitalizes my life. You know, it adds richness to my life, and I think at large it really adds great value to our culture, to our society. So I find it to be maybe not the most dangerous of professions or fields, or maybe not the most obvious as a contributor to society, but I think it's absolutely fundamental to the value of human life.